And he's like, no, that's like you're going back to an old age. Don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You should go to Jesus, who has a better office than any Levitical priest. Because at the time he's writing, there's still Levitical priests.
Yeah.
And Jesus came after Levi, who is the father of all the Levitical priests. He came after Levi. And as such, people think, well, he's inferior to Levi because he came after. Negative. This is Fixed on Jesus. Welcome to the Fixed on Jesus podcast. Here, Mark Johnson and I, along with Heather Corbitt behind the glass, what we do is we engage in all kinds of different conversation that is much like a runaway train, going down the tracks, going at speed. We see the landscape skimming by, that we don't need sound effects, skimming by, and as we go, we never really know where we're going to end up. And today, what are we going to be talking about, Mark?
Well, we're going to talk about the shadowy figure of Melchizedek. But
Bam,
before we
Melchizedek.
do that,
Have people been asking about Melchizedek?
yeah,
Nice.
I've had a couple people, but it's also one of my own personal. It's something that pops up a lot in the Psalms and Genesis and Hebrews.
Are you going to name a child Melchizedek?
That'd be interesting.
Okay,
to say the least.
I would recommend not. Anyway,
Okay.
What were you going to say?
I'm just hoping I get to name a child one day.
Okay. You can name a dog Melchizedek.
No.
I might name my
I don't think
next
I'm gonna
dog
get
Melchizedek.
a dog.
Anyway.
That's a whole other topic.
Yeah, it is.
So something I wanted to point out, and I got to say I had doubts. So my doubts were
Doubts? What are you talking
yesterday
about?
at church, or this past Sunday at church.
Yeah.
Michelle and I asked
Tripoli.
you. Yes.
Oh,
Shout out.
right. She shouted across the lobby
did.
to me.
She said, "Stop!" right there,
And I did.
and said, "Can you skip?"
That's
So
correct.
there's a
She
trend
did.
going on online, and we wanted to see.
So
if
what is the trend?
the trend is? Younger people asking older people to skip.
So am I the younger person?
You're the
in this,
younger person.
or the older person?
But Steve
in this?
Tong, on the other hand,
Oh,
we
wait.
asked him to skip.
So wait, did I skipped great. I did
You
great.
skipped great.
It was
Yeah,
awesome.
I was a little worried about your knee.
Yeah, as you should be. But
and
you
both-
asked Steve Tong?
We asked Steve Tong to skip, and he got about 1 inch off the ground on each foot.
But he did
He
it?
did do it.
Okay.
Got to give him credit.
Good.
Yeah. So
But I was a better skipper than
you were a
Steve.
better skipper. Yeah.
Okay,
if you want
Not
to be.
a surprise. Not
yeah.
a surprise. You know,
But then, that was all in the same day that you were on stage.
I was on
And
preaching.
I saw you,
preaching.
and so did Heather, lower yourself to the ground.
That's correct.
And Heather had
I'm preaching, and I'm
He's
talking
preaching.
about sheep being cast on their back.
Yes.
And sometimes
You wanted to give context?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was a physical illustration.
All right.
Are you going to forget sheep on their backs?
I will not.
Okay.
No.
That's why. Go
Especially because you bawed in the last episode.
ahead. Because I bawed. Yeah, but that was different. I didn't baw on Sunday.
So Heather, being an amazing videographer in the back, she made it very clear that
It's videographer, not videographer. Are you just learning how to speak English? Videographer is how we say that. Anyway.
Si, senor.
Okay.
She zoomed out to make sure the entirety of your bicycle
Yeah,
plank.
Okay.
You got a good core workout, and I was impressed by your ability to speak while you were
On my
bracing your
back,
core.
yeah, right.
That was solid.
I was not bracing my core. I was just laying on my back.
Yeah, but you were planking a little bit, like upside down planking.
Okay, I wasn't thinking about it
Yeah,
that way.
but then on your way up, I've heard
Yep.
some rumors that there were some
So
pops.
I got up on the left side, and you couldn't hear it because you
No.
have hearing problems.
Yes,
But the rest of the room heard it.
yes.
I had people in the back say, "Man, I heard your knee go
Ooh.
pop, pop, pop."
Ooh.
My knee is like Rice Krispies. It's a snap, crackle, and pop anytime I go down. So
Yeah.
it's. Let's just say I'm holding out for the new heavens and the new earth because that left knee, it's not going to make it
Yeah.
very far. It's not. I'm going to have to replace it soon.
Yeah, we won't make you skip anymore either.
Okay, good.
So speaking of Melchizedek,
Yes, sir.
I'm going to read from, something that kind of prompted this question was Hebrews 7,
Yes.
1 through 3.
Okay.
And for this Melchizedek, son of Salem, or king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him, Abraham portioned a 10th part of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness. And then he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. So that's the shadowy part right there.
What the heck, huh?
Yeah. What's up with that?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Melchizedek, there's a lot of debate about who he is, but to be able to start to understand the whole perspective, we need to look at two other places in the Bible that describe him first. So Melchizedek shows up in the life of Abraham. So when Abraham rescues Lot and he defeats the kings that come against him, he just out of the blue, this is Genesis chapter 14. He goes and meets the king of Sodom, and then all of a sudden, in verse 18, we read, "And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine," parentheses, "he was priest of God Most High, and he," that's Melchizedek, "blessed him," that's Abraham, "and said, Blessed be Abram," his name hadn't changed yet, "by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands." And Abram gave a 10th of everything. So that's all we got from Melchizedek in Genesis. And then nothing else. The rest of the Old Testament, he just disappears.
Yeah.
Then we see it again in one of the most important Psalms in the whole Bible. That's Psalm 110. And that is a psalm that David himself references. David references, and Jesus picks it up later. And so we read this from Psalm 110, verse 4. "The Lord," that's capital Lord, which means Yahweh or I am, "has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek."
That's kind of the part of the question as well. Like, what does that mean?
Well, and also, then the writer to the Hebrews picks it up in chapter 7.
Yeah.
Paul does not talk about Melchizedek. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, none of the boys talk about Melchizedek.
And we don't know the author of Hebrews.
We do not.
Who's our prime suspect? John?
Not John. No, that's another topic.
Okay.
But some people say Paul. It was not Paul. I have my own personal beliefs. And if you're interested, email us at production@sarahgilbert.com.
Yep.
So what can we put together? Now, in Hebrews chapter 7, we recognize a couple things. He tells us that the name by translation means king of righteousness, king of righteousness. That's what Melchizedek means. That is a literal translation of his name from Hebrew. Melech is king, Sedek is righteousness. So we've got, he is the king of righteousness. But at the same time, we're told in Genesis 14 that he is also the priest of what city?
Salem.
Which is a shortened word for what?
Shalom.
Just guess. Jerusalem. Jerusalem, right?
Ah.
Right? And so that's...
Could have reasoned through that one.
Yeah, you got it. But it's not clear or obvious, right? So so what do we have here? We have this king priest that meets Abraham.
Just out of the blue.
Out of the blue, he brings bread and wine. All right, here we go. Coming to a party. Bring bread, bring wine, I guess, Come to a party. Here's Abraham. Abraham then meets him, and then Melchizedek, he goes and he blesses Abraham. So the thing to note about this is twofold. Number one, in the Old Testament, if you look at the Levites, we find that priests cannot be kings, and kings cannot be priests, not ever.
So this is an anomaly.
This is something different. So in the Levitical order, a priest can never be a king. And in the nation of Israel, a king could never be a priest. So
he's not a Levite.
He's not a Levite.
Yeah.
And what that means is that, for example, the king could not lead the spiritual activity of the nation, right?
Right.
Like he was not the chief priest. But here's Melchizedek, who is both a king, he's the king of Salem, and he's a priest. So the other thing to recognize is that he comes out and blesses Abraham. Now,
Abram still, right?
it's Abram.
But yeah, I know.
He ends up being Abraham.
Yeah,
right? Spoiler. Okay, so
you're talking about my English.
No, well, it's not English. That's Hebrew. But anyway, he ends up blessing Abram, right? And so then the writer to the Hebrews has this point. First of all, who blesses whom, right? The greater blesses the lesser.
And when he says the greater, you mean
Melchizedek. Melchizedek is the one who brings the blessing. And Abraham recognizes that Melchizedek in some way is his superior. How? Because he gives a tenth of everything to him.
Yeah.
Right? And so Abraham, he knows the score. Whoever this guy is, he knows the score. And he's like, okay, I'm going to give you a tenth, right? Now, part of where it gets weird is the writer to the Hebrews makes this weird and strange comment where he says, verse 3, chapter 7, he is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever.
No parents. He's an orphan.
Well, that's the idea. But what the writer to the Hebrews is pointing out is that we don't have record of his genealogy. So the genealogy is silent with regard to his mother and his father and how he became a priest. It doesn't mean literally he came from nowhere. It means the text is silent.
I was wondering if it was inferring that it was supernatural that he was there.
Well, it was supernatural to a degree, but do you mean was he a pre-incarnate Christ?
I know that that's what someone might think. I don't personally think that, but
right. I don't either. But that's one of the answers people give.
Yeah.
But so what the writer to the Hebrews is saying is he's without father, mother, or genealogy, meaning that we don't know when he started. We don't know when he ended. He just shows up and then he's gone.
Yeah.
And so what the writer to the Hebrews is saying is this: the priesthood that Jesus has is superior to the Levitical priesthood and is much more like the priesthood of Melchizedek.
Okay.
So then we think about Melchizedek. Melchizedek he's the king of righteousness. Jesus, we could say he's the Melchizedek of righteousness. If we use Hebrew words, he's the king of righteousness. We'll use English words. And so he's the king of righteousness. So he resembles Melchizedek in the sense that he's both king and priest.
Yeah.
And his kingship is better than another king that went before him, like David, who would die and be forgotten. Not forgotten, but he can't reign. He only reigned 40 years, and then he died. Jesus is reigning now. So his kingship is better. But the point, remember, the writer of the Hebrews is writing to Jewish people who were tempted to go back to Judaism. They're tempted to go back to the temple and the sacrifices because of the tangible nature. I felt like I sinned, and so it doesn't feel like I'm doing much when I go to the Lord and ask forgiveness. I feel like I want to take an animal, kill it, see the blood on the ground, and then I feel better.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, that's like you're going back to an old age. Don't do that. You should go to Jesus, who has a better office than any Levitical priest, because at the time he's writing, there's still Levitical priests.
Yeah.
And Jesus came after Levi, who is the father of all the Levitical priests. He came after Levi, and as such, people think, well, he's inferior to Levi because he came after. Negative, ghostwriter. Why is that a negative? Because we see the writer to the Hebrews saying, you know what? I'm picking this up from Psalm 110 too. He didn't say this, but I'm sure he was. But Melchizedek blessed Abraham. And in the Jewish way of thinking, Levi came from Abraham, right? Came from his line. And so therefore, Melchizedek is greater than Abraham and Levi. And Jesus is a part of that priestly order. And the Melchizedekian priesthood, the Melchizedekian order, where we don't know what happened after Genesis 14, the writer to the Hebrews looks back and says, oh, you know what? The priesthood that Jesus has is like that, because the text never tells us where it ends, right?
Yeah.
And the priesthood of Jesus never ends. Now, the priesthood of the Levites has ended. When Jesus rose from the dead, there is no longer any need to do anything with a temple, anything with sacrifices, anything with the Levitical priests. which is one of the reasons I don't believe that we're going to have a temple that's going to go back up that Christians have to do anything with in Israel. Why? Because Jesus is superior to the Levitical priesthood order. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's the author. What the author to the Hebrews is saying is that Jesus is associated with him, and Jesus' priesthood resembles Melchizedek's.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is he, I guess just to clarify, is he coming from the line of Melchizedek? No. Like from a genealogy?
Genealogy, no. So the similarity here is not his genealogy.
They're just comparing his
similarity is the priesthood.
Okay.
So like in an we don't have like a authoritarian era where it's like, I only respect you if you come from a certain heritage or whatever. That's not the way it is in the United States, but in a lot of places, who you are is determined by who you were born to.
Who your father is.
Who your grandfather is, who your great-grandfather is. Like that was a big deal in Judaism, right? And so people were like, dude, if Levi has lived and died and had generations of people come after him functioning as priests, who are you, Jesus, to come and take his place?
As a non-Levi.
Yeah, and he's like, well, guess what? The writer of Hebrews is like, dude, he's better than that. How can you prove that? Let's look back in Genesis chapter 14. Boom goes the dynamite, and we have Jesus, who has a better high priest, who's a better priesthood and a more lasting priesthood than Levi, because Levi's is done.
Yeah.
It's over.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple things that came to mind. You touched on some of it. So to clarify, he's not the pre-incarnate Christ. Melchizedek is not.
We have no indication of that.
And then, but he does resemble the Son of God.
He says resemble. It doesn't say he is. So he resembles. So like resembling doesn't mean you are, right? The writer of the Hebrews says he resembles the Son of God. So he's not the Son of God.
And then in Psalm 110, that's David writing,
That's David
right?
speaking, yep.
And David knows about Melchizedek because of Genesis 14.
Correct.
Okay, so he knows the scriptures.
He knows the scripture, and it's a passage that Jesus picks up when he talks to the Pharisees, because this passage is a passage where we have the Lord, Yahweh. Like if you look at Psalm 110, verse 1, the Lord, Yahweh, says to my Lord, to another character, not Yahweh.
Oh.
So like we've got the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool. Now, the Jews had no idea what to do with that, because we have the Lord, Yahweh,
capital L-O-R-D,
saying to the Lord,
lowercase
Elohim.
Oh, okay.
Or Adonai. That's another language, but Elohim. The Lord, Yahweh, says to my Elohim, sit at my right hand. Now, to sit at right hand means you have equal authority as that person. So who in the world could have equal authority to Yahweh? Nobody, because we read about that through all the prophets. They're like, who is like God? Nobody's like God.
Yeah.
Then we have here in Psalm 110, somebody is like him because he's sitting at the right hand. And what it is, we get to later in the Psalm, we get to verse 4, the Lord has sworn and not changed his mind. You are priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So there's somebody who's coming, who is going to be like the King of righteousness, who's going to be a man.
It's a foreshadowing.
It's a foreshadowing of who?
Jesus, the Messiah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's part of what they had to expect, is somebody who would come, and then in his ministry, now, after his life, perfect life, substitutionary death, his resurrection, his ascension, and then now it's called his session, meaning he's enthroned. He is now at the right hand of God, equal authority to God, because guess what? He is God. He is God the Son, right? And so that is the order of priesthood that Jesus belongs to. And the Pharisees, the Jews, at this day, when Jesus came, had no way to explain Psalm 110. And Jesus asked them that question, and they're like, oh.
Yeah. I have just one tiny follow-up, and then thank you for answering that. You nailed it. Does the modern day believer in Judaism, do they still believe in the priestly order of the Levites?
That's a whole different can of worms. So
maybe another episode.
They do, but there's no temple and there's no sacrifice.
Okay.
So
it's
like
different.
It's different. It's different. And so, and there's different splinter groups, and all of them have different ways. So I
was just wondering if that was the moment where they're like, okay, we're sticking with the Levites, the Levitical priesthood.
No, I mean, there's all kinds of different questions on that, and it really depends on who you talk to and what they follow.
Awesome. Well, thanks for explaining that, because I've always just been curious about it. If this is something you're seeking more to understand, or you want to ask questions about this, feel free to email us. Any other things like this? Like this was something that I've talked to with a couple people, but I also was just curious how it all fit, and you want to hear Rich explain it and me ask moderately dumb to moderately medium
stuff.
questions.
You just need to learn English, that's all.
Yeah, exactly.
Apportioned.
that was
videographer.
brutal.
It's all
I don't
right.
know if that's going to be in here, but you should leave it. It'd be good. But thank you guys for tuning in, and God bless you.
We'll see you next time.
And to him, Abraham appointed a tenth
What?
part of everything.
What are you saying?
Apportioned.
Apportioned. We're still working on English here. Apportioned. Apportioned.
Oh, man.
Go ahead.
And to him, Abraham apportioned a tenth